Okay, let's dive into this explainer. I want you to just picture the cold, unforgiving concrete of a New York alleyway for a second. The smell of gunpowder and copper is incredibly thick. It's hanging heavy in the night air. And standing right there, completely wrapped in shadows, we find a man who has totally surrendered to the absolute darkest corners of his own psyche. Frank Castle is back. And his return in Punisher: One Last Kill drops us directly into a full-octane, blood-filled, brutally nonstop killing spree. I mean, it is the exact level of punishing, unrelenting grit we've been intensely craving for years now. There is absolutely no preamble here, guys. No soft landings to ease you in. Just Frank, his weapons, and a path of absolute agonizing destruction painted across the city streets. We are thrown straight into the deep end of the violence from minute one, and in this breakdown, I'm going to take you through every single facet of this journey. We're going to go piece by piece, frame by frame, to really understand the true heavy weight of this narrative. Now, what we were actually handed was essentially a 40-minute adrenaline rush. And let me be absolutely clear right out of the gate. The cinematography we witnessed was stunning. It really was. Every single shadow, every muzzle flash, it all hinted at a much larger, grimmier world that we just barely got to touch. And Jon Bernthal's performance as Frank Castle? Look, it remains completely, utterly gripping. He inhabits this character down to his very marrow. You can literally see the exhaustion and the raw rage behind his eyes in every single shot. But as I watched those credits roll barely an hour after hitting play, I just couldn't shake a very specific feeling. This felt like a half-baked, albeit incredibly respectful and deeply passionate fan film. It felt heavily restricted. It was confined to a tiny runtime and a limited scope, just constantly rushing to get to the next beat. And a character of this massive psychological magnitude, he desperately demands room to breathe. He demands a full, feature-length cinematic experience to truly explore the dark depths of his crusade. Part 1, a thrilling but rushed return. What we got versus what it should have been. So we really need to look past what was briefly dropped on our screens and let me break down my true, expanded vision for this story. I want to take you through what this narrative absolutely should have been. A fully fleshed out, meticulous, slow burn movie that actually does justice to the psychological weight of Frank Castle. Instead of rushing from one bloody encounter to the next, we need a sprawling narrative that breathes. A story that allows the tension to stretch and stretch until it finally just snaps. To put this into perspective, think about a $50 million budget for a second. In the modern landscape of Hollywood's superhero movies, the ones packed with bloated CGI and green screens, $50 million is absolute chump change. It's nothing. But for a grounded, gritty, practical effects-driven R-rated Punisher film, that is exactly what the modern cinematic landscape is starving for right now. An investment like that could have easily funded a guaranteed theatrical hit. By giving this story a proper 2-hour runtime and a massive theatrical release, you allow the narrative weight to actually settle in the audience's chest. You don't just dump a rushed 40-minute sequence. You build a massive cinematic event. And building that event starts with laying the exact right foundation. Let's move to and see how this builds. Act 1, the Nucci Empire. Building the targets. In a proper feature film, we don't just see faceless goons getting gunned down in a quick montage. We need to intimately understand the targets. Enter the Nucci family. I want to spend time really painting the stark duality of this criminal empire. We need quiet, highly disturbing scenes dedicated to showing the horrific, unforgivable crimes committed by the older Nucci sons. But we must contrast that pure darkness with Ma Nucci. I want to see her as a deeply conflicted mother, struggling desperately to keep her youngest boy innocent. She's trying to steer him away from the family's bloody legacy, while tragically and hypocritically accepting the life of luxury funded by their empire of crime. It gives the enemies a face, it gives them a soul, and a terrifying complexity. And while the Nucci family goes about their comfortable, hypocritical lives, we cut to Frank. He is a total ghost in their neighborhood. I want the audience to feel the slow, methodical, agonizing tension of Frank Castle holed up in a grimy, dimly lit local apartment right across the street. We don't just jump straight to the shooting. We watch him conduct days of silent, grueling surveillance. We see him drinking stale, cold coffee, meticulously logging the Nucci family's daily routines, learning their blind spots, and memorizing their patrol schedules. He is a lethal predator, sitting in absolute oppressive stillness before making a single calculated move.
And as he conducts this intense stakeout, we establish a massive psychological point for Frank, because while he sits in the pitch black of that apartment, a tiny cracked television flickers continuously in the background. We hear the blaring news broadcasts. They are reporting absolute chaos on a macro level across the city. Mayor Kingpin's corrupt policies, Daredevil running across the rooftops, and the anti-vigilante task force violently rounding people up in what looks like a massive citywide civil war. The entire city of New York is literally tearing itself apart. And Frank, he watches the screen for a second, and he simply turns the TV off. He chooses to completely ignore that massive world-ending war outside his window. So why ignore it? Because his focus is absolutely singular. He is solely dedicated to hunting this one final family tied to the murder of his own wife and children. The apocalypse could be raining down on the macro level of New York, but Frank's micro-level obsession with the Nuccis is all-consuming. He is a man who only sees the mission right in front of him.
Act 2. Total neighborhood collapse, the consequences of vengeance.
This brings us right into the second act, where that methodical stillness violently shatters. Frank finally makes his move, and we witness the brutal surgical execution of the older Nucci targets. But we need to see that vengeance doesn't happen in a vacuum. In a feature-length film, we would see the entire neighborhood structurally and socially collapse around him. The innocent families living in the surrounding buildings, people we would have taken the time to actually meet and care about in the first act, are suddenly caught in the crossfire of an urban war zone. Frank's actions have horrific, unintended consequences that he has to reckon with. With her sons dead, Ma Nucci retaliates with a blinding, apocalyptic rage. But as the quote here points out, she knows exactly who she is dealing with. She couldn't just send one hitman to take out Frank Castle. That would be absolute suicide. Instead, she needed massive chaos with Frank trapped right in the middle of it. She authorizes a full-scale, devastating, military-style assault in Frank's apartment complex. And for those who intimately know the lore, this perfectly parallels the vicious gang war tactics used by Schoonover and Rollins in Frank's past. You don't try to snipe a predator like the Punisher. You try to bury him under a mountain of bodies and overwhelming firepower, just hoping he'll catch a stray bullet in the sheer madness of it all. What follows is a deeply claustrophobic, visceral, brilliantly choreographed sequence, the apartment siege. We need to literally feel the splintering drywall shattering under heavy caliber rounds. The air thickens with gray smoke filling the tight hallways, and the deafening roar of automatic gunfire violently echoes through the concrete stairwells, leaving a permanent ringing in the audience's ears. Frank isn't just on the offensive anymore. This is a desperate, bloody, grueling fight for survival. I want to see him pushed to his absolute physical limits. He takes heavy damage, limping, bleeding out, as he makes a split-second choice to shield and save a poor, terrified civilian family trapped on his floor. But that heroism, that tiny glimmer of humanity, comes at a severe tactical cost. Because he stops to save them, instead of pursuing his target, he is forced to watch Ma Nucci slip away into the smoke, entirely escaping his grasp.
So, what happens when the thick smoke finally clears? The apartment building is nothing but a smoldering, bullet-ridden ruin. Fire alarms are wailing in the distance, and rising from the ashes of his destroyed safe house, Frank is battered, covered in blood and concrete dust, but he's entirely unbroken. His resolve has only hardened. This is the pivotal moment where the stealth, slow-burn thriller movie officially becomes an all-out, relentless war movie. Frank's initial quiet surgical strike has utterly failed. It has completely devolved into full-scale chaos, and the element of surprise is gone forever. There is no more hiding in the shadows across the street. There's only the inevitable, brutal, face-to-face conclusion. Act 3. The Penthouse Assault. Donning the skull one last time. This is where half measures die. We get that iconic, heavy cinematic sequence of Frank finally pulling on the vest, painting that terrifying skull across his chest. He marches straight into the absolute heart of Ma Nucci's empire. I am talking about a hyper-violent, bloody, meticulously choreographed raid against a small army of heavily armed guards. It's an adrenaline-fueled nightmare for the cartel. He tears through that penthouse floor by floor, unleashing every single weapon in his arsenal, acting as a relentless, terrifying force of nature that simply cannot be stopped by bullets, locked doors, or desperate barricades. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we transition to a punishment worse than death, the emotional core. The gunfire finally stops. The smoke hangs incredibly low in the air. Frank kicks open the massive double doors to the master office, and we drastically shift the pacing. We bring this high-octane action to a slow, incredibly heavy, agonizing halt. Frank finally stands face-to-face with Ma Nucci. Now, this shouldn't be resolved with a quick, mindless bullet. This needs to be a deeply emotional, dialogue-driven confrontation. The silence in the room should be absolutely deafening.
broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing. These two characters finally look at each other, not through the distant lens of a sniper rifle, but intimately, eye to eye. We break down this intense exchange where the mirror is completely held up to both of them. They sit across from each other and the horrifying realization just sets in. They are exactly the same. Two parents, two monsters, two grieving parents who lost their families and allowed that bottomless, consuming grief to completely twist them into absolute nightmares. Minucci's actions are responsible for the blood of Frank's family, and Frank is now covered in the blood of hers. The room is thick with the overwhelming tragedy of their shared, miserable existence. And here is the absolute philosophical and emotional climax of my narrative. Frank slowly raises his gun, aiming directly at her head. Minucci closes her eyes, defeated, entirely ready for the end. The audience holds their breath. But then, Frank slowly lowers the weapon. He makes a shocking, profound decision. He lets her live. Why? Because Frank knows something she is only just beginning to learn. He knows his own agonizing daily existence. He knows that waking up every single morning with that profound, suffocating grief, staring at the empty space where your family used to be, is a much darker, much more agonizing punishment than a quick bullet to the head. Living with that grief is a punishment far worse than death. The tragic irony here is immense. He doesn't grant her the sweet mercy of death. He condemns her to live in his personal hell. He leaves her completely alone with the ghosts.
Protecting the streets of New York, a new purpose. This heavy realization transitions us smoothly into the epilogue, and we experience a massive atmospheric shift. A changed Frank Castle steps out into the freezing cold New York night. He meets with Karen Page in a quiet, neon-lit diner. The world around them has shifted dramatically since his crusade began. Over black coffee, they discuss the massive fallout of Matt Murdock revealing his identity to the public and subsequently getting incarcerated. The city has lost its devil. The streets are completely vulnerable. A massive power vacuum has opened up, and the criminal underworld is already beginning to smell blood in the water. Frank looks out the diner window at the dark city. He has finally closed the book on his family's murder. That specific, personal war is over, but a new, much larger one is just beginning. We see Frank make his final, triumphant decision. He chooses to re-don the skull permanently, but this time it's not just for personal selfish vengeance. He takes up Karen's long-standing request. He is going to protect the city. He is stepping into the devil's shoes, preparing to hold the line on the streets alongside the remaining street-level heroes like Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Spider-Man. He is no longer just a man seeking revenge. He has evolved into the Punisher, the permanent Grim Reaper and ultimate guardian of New York's underworld. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought to really ponder as the screen fades to black. Has Frank Castle finally found his true purpose in the shadows of New York? Has the ghost finally, truly become the guardian? This expansive, deeply emotional vision takes us far beyond a quick shootout. It gives us a profound character study of grief, the heavy consequences of violence, and ultimate rebirth. It's a vision that fully respects the bloody legacy of the skull. After breaking down exactly what this could be, I'm honestly hungrier than ever to see this full-blown cinematic reality truly come to life.